The scent of overchilled air and lilies hit her first. It was the smell of money trying too hard. Amara smoothed the front of her simple navy dress, a nervous habit she thought she had kicked after the divorce. Her friend, Chloe, had called this place in Gangnam aggressively elegant now. Standing in the marble foyer, Amara understood. The hostess, a woman who looked like she was carved from ice, gave her a polite but vacant smile. "Reservation for Williams," Amara said, her voice steadier than she felt. The hostess's eyes flickered down a screen.
"Ah, yes.
"Your party is already here. This way, please."
Party?
Chloe had set this up. A blind date.
Singular.
One man. The word party sent a small, irrational spike of anxiety through her. Her ex-husband, David, had loved parties, loved showing her off at them, his hand of vice on her waist, his smile alive for the cameras. She pushed the thought away. This was new. This was her, finally moving on. She followed the hostess through a hushed landscape of white tablecloths and hushed conversations. They stopped at a secluded booth in the back, overlooking a meticulously sculpted garden. A man stood as they approached, his movement economical and sharp. He was tall, encased in a black suit so perfectly tailored it seemed a part of him. Tom Ford, her mind supplied, a useless bit of trivia from her former life. But it wasn't the suit that held her attention. It was the absolute stillness of him. He moved like the room owed him space. And standing next to him, her small hand clutching his, was a little girl. The girl couldn't have been more than 7, a miniature princess in a light pink dress, her dark hair held back with a matching bow. She looked at Amara with wide, curious eyes. Amara's professional instincts kicked in before her confusion could. As a pediatric physical therapist, she spent her days with children, coaxing them through pain and frustration, celebrating tiny victories.
She knew that look.
It was the cautious appraisal of a child in an adult world. The man's face was a mask of cold politeness. His eyes, a deep, unforgiving brown, swept over her once, a clinical assessment that left her feeling like a line item on a balance sheet. There was no warmth, no interest, just evaluation and dismissal. "Miss Williams," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and devoid of accent. "I apologize. There has been a misunderstanding. My childcare arrangements fell through unexpectedly. This evening is not going to work." He wasn't asking. He was informing. His hand was already reaching for his wallet, no doubt to leave cash for her trouble. Amara's first reaction was a wave of relief, so profound it almost made her dizzy. She could go home, put on sweatpants, and forget the entire mortifying experience. But then her eyes met the little girl's. The child looked down at her shiny black shoes, a flicker of disappointment crossing her small face. Amara gave her a small, soft smile. "That's a very beautiful dress," she said, speaking directly to the girl. The child's head popped up, her eyes wide with surprise at being addressed. A shy smile bloomed on her face. "Thank you. My name is Hannah." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Hannah."
"I'm Amara."
The man, Hannah's father, stiffened. It was a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders, but in the quiet intensity of the booth, it felt like a seismic shift. He had already written this encounter off, and she had just reopened the ledger. "We will be leaving," he said, his voice clipped. He placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. But Hannah didn't move. She looked from Amara's kind face to her father's stern one. Her lower lip trembled just a little. She tightened her grip on his hand. "But Daddy," she whispered, her voice carrying in the quiet space. "She's nice." The words hung in the air, simple and devastatingly honest. Kwon Jinwoo froze. Everything in him, every instinct honed by years of navigating a world of violence and betrayal, screamed at him to walk away. This woman, with her calm eyes and gentle smile, was a complication. She was part of a world he no longer belonged to, a world of normal dates and pleasant conversation he'd buried with his wife. He had agreed to this meeting only to satisfy the relentless nagging of his second-in-command, who insisted he needed to move on. One look at Amara Williams confirmed it was a mistake. She was soft, breakable, everything his life destroyed. But Hannah's words struck a chord deep inside him he thought had gone silent. She's nice. In his world, niceness was a liability, a weakness to be exploited. Yet, coming from his daughter, it sounded like a prayer. He looked at Amara again, truly looked this time. He saw the intelligence in her gaze, the quiet strength in her posture that he had initially mistaken for fragility. He saw the genuine warmth she directed at his daughter, a warmth no one had shown Hannah since a mother. He slowly withdrew his hand from his wallet. His jaw was a hard, unforgiving line. "One drink," he stated, his voice low and laced with a warning. "Then you will leave." He slid into the booth, his movements precise, and gestured for Amara to take the seat opposite. Hannah scrambled in beside him, beaming, her brief sadness forgotten. Amara sat, her heart doing a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. She told herself it was just for the little girl, a kindness. But as she met the cold, unyielding gaze of the man across from her, she knew she had just agreed to something far more complicated than a drink. The air between them crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with a first date and everything to do with a silent, unspoken contract she didn't understand. That was the moment everything changed. She had walked in for a blind date and walked into his world instead. The silence that followed was not empty. It was weighted, a physical presence in the booth. Jinwoo picked up the wine list, his focus absolute, as if he were studying enemy troop movements. Hannah, seated beside him, swung her legs, the soft taps of her shoes against the leather upholstery the only sound. Amara watched them, a strange diptych of danger and innocence. The man was carved from granite, his stillness a predatory calm. The child was all light and movement, a splash of pink against his monochrome world. "So," Amara began, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. "Hannah, do you like school?" Hannah nodded vigorously. "I like art best. We're making paper dragons." "I love paper dragons," Amara said, her smile genuine now. "You have to get the folds just right or they won't fly." "Daddy can't fold," Hannah confided in a loud whisper. "He just makes squares." A muscle ticked in Jinwoo's jaw. He placed the wine list down with surgical precision. "I am occupied with other matters." "He's very busy," Hannah translated, nodding sagely. A waiter appeared, silent and efficient. Jinwoo ordered a bottle of wine Amara had never heard of without consulting her, his tone leaving no room for discussion. He ordered a steak rare. For Hannah, a small plate of pasta. He then looked at Amara, his gaze expectant. "I'll have the sea base," she said, refusing to be intimidated. He gave a curt nod to the waiter, who vanished as quietly as he'd arrived. "You're American," Jinwoo stated. It wasn't a question. "I am. I moved to Seoul 2 years ago." "Why?" The single word was a demand for information. "No pleasantries. No softening inquiry." Just a stark, clinical request for data. "For a job." "I'm a pediatric physical therapist at the International Children's Hospital." The moment the words left her mouth, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't interest. It was recognition. He was connecting her profession to her effortless rapport with his daughter.
He was analyzing it.
"You are good with children," he observed, his voice flat. "It's my job to be." "My wife was good with children," he said, and the temperature in the booth dropped 5 degrees. The words were a wall of ice. He wasn't sharing a memory, he was posting a warning. "Do not enter." Amara understood. This man was not here to date. He was here to fulfill an obligation, a box to be checked.
And he was grieving.
The pain radiating from him was so profound it was almost a physical force. It wasn't the loud, performative grief her ex-husband had feigned after his father died. It was a vast, silent emptiness. A black hole that pulled all the light and warmth from the space around him. She simply nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss." He didn't acknowledge her sympathy. He just stared at the garden outside, his profile sharp and unforgiving against the low light. That was his wound. The woman he had lost. And it was a wound he clearly had no intention of letting anyone near. The food arrived, and the tension eased slightly as Hannah chattered about her paper dragon, occasionally demanding a bite of her father's steak, which he cut into impossibly small, perfect cubes for her. Amara watched his hands. They were large, with long, elegant fingers. A faint, silvery scar traced the line of his thumb. They were the hands of a pianist or a surgeon, precise and steady. Yet there was a latent power in them that made her skin prickle. That's when she saw them. A group of 4 men entered the restaurant. They were loud, their suits expensive but ill-fitting, a stark contrast to Jinwoo's quiet elegance. They moved with a swagger that was meant to command attention, but it was the wrong kind of attention. It was cheap and loud. The other diners subtly angled themselves away. The staff grew tense. But Jinwoo went perfectly still. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. He didn't reach for anything, didn't look around. He simply stopped, his fork halfway to his mouth. Every ounce of his focus narrowed onto the approaching men. The air thickened, growing heavy and dangerous. One of the men, a heavy-set man with a cruel smile, broke from the group and swaggered toward their table. Jinwoo placed his fork down, the silver making a soft, deliberate click against the china. He subtly shifted in his seat, his body becoming a physical barrier between the approaching man and his daughter. With a small, almost imperceptible movement of his foot, he nudged Amara's chair slightly backward, increasing the distance between her and the threat. It was a protective gesture, instinctual and absolute. "Kwon Jinwoo," the man boomed, his voice oily. "Fancy seeing you here. Enjoying a family meal?" His eyes, small and dark, slid from Jinwoo to Hannah, and then, with a predatory slowness, to Amara. He licked his lips. "You found a replacement quickly." Amara felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. This was not a chance encounter. This was a confrontation. Jinwoo's eyes were flat, lifeless pits of obsidian.
Park.
"You are a long way from your territory." "Just expanding my interests," Park said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. His gaze lingered on Amara. "Very interesting interest." Hannah, sensing the shift, pressed closer to her father, her small face pale with fear. Amara's heart went out to her. Without thinking, she reached her hand under the table and gently took Hannah's. The little girl's hand was cold and trembling. Amara leaned in close, pitching her voice, so only Hannah could hear.
"Hey,
let's play a game." The quiet game. But with our fingers, she began to slowly tap out a rhythm on the back of Hannah's hand. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. A simple pattern she used with her patients to help them focus through painful stretches. Hannah's wide, frightened eyes met hers. Amara gave her a tiny, reassuring nod and continued the pattern. Slowly, the trembling in Hannah's hand began to subside as she focused on the sensation, the predictable rhythm a small anchor in a sea of adult tension. Above the table, the war of words continued, low and menacing. "Your empire is built on old loyalties, Kwon," Park sneered. "Old things crumble, and new things burn," Jinwoo replied, his voice a silken threat.
Leave. Now."
There was a moment of charged silence where Park seemed to weigh his options. He glanced at Jinwoo's impassive face, then at the other diners who were pretending not to watch, and finally, his eyes fell on Amara and Hannah under the table, their hands clasped together. A strange look crossed his face, a flicker of calculation. He gave a final, dismissive smirk and turned away, rejoining his men. The moment they were gone, it was as if the restaurant could breathe again. The ambient chatter resumed, but in their booth, the silence remained, heavier than before. Jinwoo did not relax. His eyes followed Park's group until they left the restaurant. Only then did he turn his attention back to the table. His gaze fell on Amara's hand, still holding his daughter's beneath the tablecloth. He watched her continue the silent, rhythmic tapping, her expression calm and focused. He had seen her choice. When the danger appeared, when any sane person would have frozen or fled, she had acted. She hadn't run. She had stayed. She had protected his daughter, not with force, but with intelligence and compassion. She had built a wall of calm around Hannah that even he could not have constructed. He slowly lifted his gaze from their joined hands to her face. The look in his eyes was different now. The cold dismissal was gone. In its place was something new, something sharp and unsettling. It was the look of a man who had just discovered an unexpected asset, or perhaps an unforeseen complication he could no longer afford to ignore. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The charged look was a rehook, pulling her deeper into a world she was beginning to realize she had no way of escaping. She had made a deliberate choice to stay when she could have left, and in doing so, she had marked herself. She had marked herself as his. He settled the bill with a black card that the waiter handled with something akin to reverence. No words were exchanged on the way out of the restaurant, a silent bubble of tension enclosing the three of them. Jinwoo's hand rested on the small of Hannah's back, guiding her, but his awareness was fixed on Amara, walking a half-step behind him. She could feel his attention like a physical touch, a weight on her skin. She expected him to put her in a taxi. It was the logical, clean end to a disastrous evening. But when they reached the curb, a gleaming black Maybach slid to a silent stop before them. A man in a dark suit emerged from the driver's seat, opened the rear door, and bowed his head slightly to Jinwoo. "Get in," Jinwoo commanded.
It was not a request.
"I can get a cab," Amara protested, her independence bristling. His eyes met hers over the roof of the car. They were hard, unyielding. "Park saw you with us. You are not taking a taxi." The implication hit her like a punch to the gut. The danger wasn't over. It had just begun, and now it had her name attached to it. Her choice in the restaurant, the simple act of comforting a child, had entangled her in this. Swallowing her pride, she slid into the buttery leather interior. Hannah climbed in after her, choosing to sit in the middle, a small, warm bridge between Amara and Jinwoo, who settled in on the other side. The car pulled into the neon-drenched Seoul traffic with impossible smoothness. The city's noise was reduced to a distant hum, the bulletproof glass insulating them in a cocoon of tense silence. Hannah, exhausted by the evening's events, leaned her head against Amara's shoulder and fell asleep almost instantly. Amara froze, unsure what to do. She glanced at Jinwoo. He was staring out the window, his expression unreadable, but he gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod. Permission granted. She relaxed slightly, her arm curling protectively around the sleeping child. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. She told herself it was survival instinct that kept her quiet, that made her watch his reflection in the darkened window. He moved like he owned the city, his gaze sweeping over the streets with an air of cold possession. That's when she saw it in the side mirror. A black sedan, 2 cars back, mirroring their every lane change. It was clinical, professional. Her breath caught. Jinwoo's head turned, his eyes locking with hers in the reflection. He had seen it too. Of course he had. He had probably seen it the moment they pulled away from the curb. He said nothing to his driver. He simply reached inside his jacket and drew a sleek, black handgun, the metal seeming to absorb the light. He rested it on his lap, his hand covering it with a casualness that was more terrifying than any overt threat. Amara's blood ran cold. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. This wasn't a movie. This was a man with a gun in a car with his sleeping daughter, being followed by people who likely had guns of their own. And she was trapped in the middle of it. The driver, without a word of instruction, made a sharp, unexpected turn down a narrow side street. The sedan followed. The chase was on. It wasn't a screeching, high-octane affair. It was brutally efficient. The Maybach moved with the power of a tank, the driver navigating the tight alleys of Seoul with terrifying precision. A second sedan appeared, attempting to cut them off. The first gunshot sounded like a firecracker, loud and sharp. Hannah whimpered in her sleep, burrowing closer to Amara. The second shot was a deafening crack as it struck the glass near Jinwoo's head, spiderwebbing the window but not breaking through. "Get down." Jinwoo's voice was a low, lethal command. He pushed Amara's head down, his arm a band of steel across her back, shielding both her and Hannah with his body. The scent of his cologne, oud and black pepper, filled her senses, a strange, grounding detail in the chaos. The car swerved violently. More shots rang out. Jin-woo returned fire, 2 precise shots through his own shattered window, the sound deafening inside the car. There was a squeal of tires, the crunch of metal. Then silence. Their car straightened out, accelerating smoothly back onto a main thoroughfare as if nothing had happened. Amara slowly raised her head. In the side mirror, she saw one of the sedans crashed into a wall, the other peeling away into the darkness. Jin-woo was already putting his weapon away. His breathing was even, his hand steady. He had moved through the violence like it was a language he was born speaking. They drove the rest of the way in absolute silence. They didn't go to her apartment. Instead, they pulled into a sterile underground garage beneath a skyscraper that looked more like a corporate headquarters than a residential building. He led them to a private elevator. His apartment, a penthouse, she realized, was vast and minimalist, all glass and steel, with a panoramic view of the glittering city. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress. "Hannah's room is this way," he said, his voice strained. It was only then, in the bright, clinical light of the hallway, that she saw the dark stains spreading across the sleeve of his white shirt, just below the shoulder. "You're hurt," she said, her voice quiet. "It's a graze," he dismissed, his focus on getting his daughter to bed. He gently lifted the sleeping girl from Amara's arms. For a moment, watching him carry his daughter, his face softened with a tenderness that was so at odds with the killer in the car, her heart ached. He returned a few minutes later, his jacket gone, the tear in his shirt, and the blood more visible. He went to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "You should go to a doctor," she said, her therapist's instincts taking over. "I don't use doctors," he replied flatly, pouring a generous amount of amber liquid into each glass. He handed one to her. Their fingers brushed. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up her arm. She ignored it. "That needs to be cleaned. At least let me look at it." She crossed a line. She knew it. This was no longer just being a witness. This was offering aid. This was complicity. He watched her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face, trying to decipher her motives. Finally, he gave a curt nod and sat on the edge of a severe leather sofa, shrugging out of his stained shirt. The wound was a deep, angry gash along his bicep. She retrieved the first aid kit she spotted in a bathroom and knelt before him. Her hands, usually so steady when dealing with her small patients, trembled slightly as she cleaned the wound. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. He just watched her, his gaze intense, tracking the movement of her hands. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft dab of the antiseptic wipe against his skin. She worked, focusing on the task, on the clinical details, anything to avoid the intimacy of the moment. His proximity was overwhelming. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, see the hard planes of his chest, the taut lines of his stomach. She was touching him, willingly. When she was done, her hands lingered for a second too long on his arm. She pulled back as if burned. He finally spoke, his voice rough. "You should have run the moment you saw me at that restaurant." It was a tension confession, an admission of the danger he represented. She met his gaze, her own unwavering. "Your daughter asked me to stay, it was the truth, but not the whole truth. She could have left a dozen times. She didn't. And she wasn't entirely sure why." "Park made his move because he saw you," he said, his voice dangerously low.
He saw you with Hannah.
"He saw you as a vulnerability. A weakness he could exploit." He looked at her, his eyes dark with a truth she did not want to hear. "He has made this personal. He has targeted you." The war between them, the push and pull of his world and hers, was over. The enemy had made a move that dragged her fully into his territory, and he had just made it clear that there was no going back. The next 24 hours were a blur of calculated stillness. Jinwa's penthouse became their gilded cage. Men in dark suits came and went, speaking to him in low, urgent tones. Amara caught snippets of their conversations, talk of territories, loyalty, and retribution. She and Hannah were confined to the main living area, the floor-to-ceiling windows a constant reminder of the normal world just beyond their reach. Amara focused on Hannah, channeling her anxiety into creating a bubble of normalcy for the child. They drew pictures, built elaborate forts out of sofa cushions, and read stories. Through it all, Amara was acutely aware of Jinwoo. He was a constant, brooding presence, either on the phone orchestrating his war or watching them, his expression unreadable. He watched the easy way she interacted with his daughter, the way she could make Hannah laugh, and a complicated, almost painful look would cross his face. The moment one of them almost lost the other had already happened in the car, but the true threat wasn't gone. It was regrouping. Amara knew this. She could feel it in the way Jinwoo never stood with his back to the door, in the way his hand always seemed to be resting near the small of his back. Late the second night, he was standing by the window, staring down at the river of light that was Seoul. Hannah was asleep, tucked into her bed. The apartment was silent. "You've given them everything they need to find you," he said without turning around. "What are you talking about? Your friend,
Chloe.
You texted her when you arrived at the restaurant. You told her the name." His voice was flat, but an undercurrent of something, frustration, maybe even fear, ran beneath it. "You told her you were with me. They will have checked your phone records. They will have talked to her. Park's people are not stupid. They know who you are now. They know where you live. They know where you work." A cold dread washed over her. Her old life, her quiet, carefully reconstructed existence, was not just on hold. It was compromised. It was a liability. I can talk to her. I can tell her it was a mistake." He finally turned to face her. "And she will believe you? After you disappeared for 2 days? After men like Park started sniffing around?" He took a step closer. "There is no going back to that life, Amara." He said her name differently than anyone else did. It wasn't soft. It was possessive. A claim. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I want you to be smart," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I want you to survive." That night, the call came. Amara was woken by the sound of a glass shattering. She ran into the living room to find Jinwoo standing with the phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. His knuckles were white where he gripped the phone. A fallen whiskey tumbler lay in pieces at his feet. "Where?" he snarled into the phone. "Where's she?" Amara's heart stopped.
She. Hannah.
He slammed the phone down, a guttural roar of rage and pain tearing from his throat. He swept his arm across a nearby table, sending a vase of flowers crashing to the floor. For the first time, she saw him lose control. The cold, calculating man was gone, replaced by a terrified father. "They have her," he breathed, his eyes wild. "Park has Hannah." He looked at Amara, and what she saw in his gaze broke her heart. It was utter despair. "He wants to trade her life for my territory in Itaewon." His men were already mobilizing, a quiet, deadly storm gathering in the apartment. Jinwoo was pulling on a Kevlar vest, his movements jerky, his mind clearly racing. He was about to go on a rampage, to tear the city apart to find his daughter. And he would get her killed. "Wait," Amara said, her voice cutting through the tense preparations. Every man in the room stopped and looked at her. Jinwoo's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "Stay out of this." "No." She walked toward him, her step certain. She was no longer a civilian caught in the crossfire. She was the one person in this room who knew Hannah best. "You're thinking like a boss. You need to think like a father." Where would he take her? "A warehouse, a safe house," one of his men started. "No," Amara insisted, looking directly at Jinwoo. "He wants to hurt you. He'll take her somewhere that means something to you. Somewhere she would feel safe, to make the betrayal cut deeper." "Where did you used to take her?" "With your wife." Jinwoo stared at her, his rage momentarily forgotten, replaced by a dawning understanding. His mind was a tactical map of assets and threats. Hers was a map of a little girl's heart. "The old tea house," he whispered, the realization hitting him. "In Insadong." My wife loved the gardens there. He'll be expecting you to come in with guns blazing, Amara said, her mind working quickly. He'll use Hannah as a shield, but he won't be expecting me. Absolutely not, Jinwoo snarled. You are not going. I'm not going to fight, she said, her gaze firm. I'm going for Hannah. She's going to be terrified. She'll see your men, she'll see Park, and she'll panic. But if she sees me, if she hears my voice, I can calm her down. I can get her to focus. I can give you the opening you need. She was acting decisively, taking her one piece of expertise and turning it into a weapon. She was never going to be rescued passively. He looked at her, at the fierce determination in her eyes. He was at war with himself. Every instinct screamed at him to protect her, to lock her away. But he knew she was right. Her presence was a tactical advantage he could not afford to dismiss. The cost was paid in that moment of decision. Her old world was not just compromised, it was gone, burned away by the choice she was making. She was crossing a line she could never uncross. The tea house was an island of tranquility in a sea of urban sprawl. Ancient wood, paper screens, and the scent of green tea. But tonight it was a trap. Jinwoo's men, ghosts in the darkness, surrounded the perimeter. Jinwoo, Amara at his side, slipped in through a back entrance. He moved with a silent, lethal grace that was terrifying to behold. He held her hand, his grip firm, a silent promise of protection. They found them in the main room, overlooking the moonlit garden. Park had Hannah on his lap. The girl was crying silently, her small body rigid with fear. Two of Park's men stood guard. I knew you'd come, Kwan, Park said with a triumphant smile. Always sentimental. Jinwoo didn't speak. His focus was entirely on his daughter. Amara saw it, the beginning of a panic attack. Hannah's breathing was becoming shallow, her eyes wide and unfocused. Park wouldn't know how to handle it. He would see it as defiance. This was her moment. Hannah, Amara called out, her voice calm and clear, but loud enough to carry across the room. Hannah, look at me. Hannah's head snapped up. Her eyes found Amara's. Breathe with me, sweetie, Amara said, her voice a soothing balm. Remember our game? Big breath in, like you're smelling a flower. Amara exaggerated the motion. And blow it out, like you're blowing out a candle. Park looked confused, his attention shifting to Amara for a split second. What is this? It was the opening Jinwoo needed. In a blur of motion, he moved. It wasn't a firefight. It was a symphony of violence. Two silent, precise movements, and Park's guards were down, unconscious before they hit the floor. He closed the distance to Park, his expression something beyond rage. It was absolute certainty. Park, panicked, shoved Hannah away from him, trying to draw his own weapon. But he was too slow. Jinwoo was on him. The confrontation brutal, personal, and blessedly short. It was over. Jinwoo went to his daughter, scooping her into his arms. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking with relief. Hannah clung to him, her sobs finally breaking free. Over his daughter's head, Jinwoo's eyes found Amara's. The look he gave her was stripped bare of all his armor. It was raw, grateful, and something more. Something that staked a claim deeper than any words could. He walked toward her, still holding Hannah. He didn't release his daughter. Instead, he took Amara's hand and placed it on Hannah's back, his own hand covering hers, enclosing the three of them in a tight, desperate circle. A new family unit, forged in terror and violence. His acknowledgement of what she was to him was no longer deniable, no longer hidden. She was not a weakness. She was his center. Back in the penthouse fortress, the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. Hannah was asleep in her room, safe. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and an irrevocable truth. Amara's old life was a ghost. She could never go back to being just a therapist, to worrying about unpaid bills and bad dates. That person was gone. She stood by the window, wrapping her arms around herself. Jinwoo came to stand beside her, his reflection appearing next to hers in the dark glass. He didn't look at her, but spoke to the image in the window, his voice a low murmur that vibrated through the floor. He saw you as a weakness, he said. His reflection's eyes met hers. He was wrong, he paused, the silence stretching, filled with the weight of everything they had survived. You are a liability I will not give up. It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact. A sentence and a vow all in one. He was the most dangerous man she had ever met, and his world was a nightmare of violence and fear. But for the first time since she'd left her husband, she didn't feel trapped. She felt seen. She felt chosen. She looked at their reflections, the broken man and the woman who had refused to break, and she made her choice. She stayed.